everybody. I'm Evie Roberts, and this is my podcast, Talking in the Dark. Welcome. The aim of this podcast is to raise awareness about blindness, visual impairment, and disability in general, in a happy and light-hearted way. For those of you that don't know, I am blind. I was born with a condition called bilateral anophthalmia. Try spelling that one. It basically means that when I was born, my eyes didn't develop properly, so I wear prosthetics instead. The goal of this podcast is to remove some of the stigma and stereotypes around disabilities, whilst also having fun at the same time. Each week, I will be interviewing people from all walks of life, including some with hidden or physical disabilities like mine, and getting to know a little bit more about them and the lives they lead. This week, I am very excited to tell you that I will be talking to Ben Wilson from Extant Theatre Company for the blind and visually impaired. My name is Evie Roberts, and this is my podcast, Talking in the Dark. Welcome. Hi Ben, how are you?
I'm wonderful, thanks for having me. It's really exciting to be here.
Oh, thank you so much for coming on the podcast. How's your day going?
Not too bad. It's very stormy and windy and wet where I am, so I'm very happy to be hiding indoors and not venturing out.
Oh yeah, definitely. Yeah, it's super windy over here. It has been the past couple of days. So there is something quite nice about being in school and not having to go out in it much.
That sounds good. Yeah, hide away, keep safe.
Oh yeah, definitely. And then I feel like as well, when it gets to like nighttime, because my bedroom's right at the top of the house, it's so hard to sleep when it's all stormy and everything.
Absolutely, yeah. It just sounds like you're terrified the house is going to fall down around you sometimes. Yeah.
Literally, you just lay there like, is everything okay? Are we good?
Well, I bet it's really exciting on the Isle of Man to be with waves crashing and winds blowing and stuff like that. So I bet it's beautiful when it's like this on the Isle of Man, I imagine.
It's exciting, but also slightly terrifying because you're kind of like, oh God, okay, this is cool. Yep.
Yeah, I imagine I would not want to get on the boat on the ferry in this weather. That sounds like an awful idea. Although I was in the Isle of Man a couple of weeks ago. I was in Port Erin a couple of weeks ago, which is where my grandparents lived whilst they were still with us. So I popped over and took my partner and showed her the sites I used to visit when I was little and used to come over and visit my grandparents.
Oh, that's lovely. So did you grow up on the Isle of Man then, or?
I didn't. No, my dad did. But then by the time he'd had me, he'd moved over to England, moved over to the mainland. So yeah. But I always went over to visit my grandparents at least once a year whilst they were alive. And yeah, I love it. I feel part Manx in my heart, even if I've never lived there.
Oh, yeah, definitely. So to begin with, can you please tell me a bit about Extant?
Of course, yeah. So Extant are Britain's leading theatre company for visually impaired and blind theatre makers, theatre artists, performers. They were founded in 1997 by Maria Oshodi, who is still the artistic director and CEO. And Extant works really hard to create opportunities for visually impaired theatre makers and actors and directors and writers to make work, to develop their career, to fight for a place within mainstream theatre for VI artists. So that involves sort of lots of things. It involves putting on productions. It involves that tour around the UK. Extant has produced a number of I couldn't be able to tell you how many shows over the years that have toured around the UK and toured into Europe as well. It also involves a lot of what we call artist development, which does what it says on the tin, which is about developing the next generation or developing the current generation as well, about artists at all levels of their career, helping them get to the next level. We also do participation stuff, which is more about people who aren't professionals but want to have a go at theatre and acting and that sort of stuff. And we also do consultancy with the rest of the industry to support them in getting better at working with visually impaired artists and audiences.
Oh, brilliant. So it sounds like you guys do quite a lot then.
Yeah, definitely. A lot. There's always a lot going on.
Yeah, it definitely sounds like it. So what is your role within the company and when did you begin working with them?
So I am a relatively new member of staff at Extant. I started in July of last year. My job title is trainee artistic director. So artistic director is that's like the big job in theatre. That's the boss. The artistic director of a theatre or a theatre company they're the person in charge, really, making the decisions about what work you put on, what shows you do, what artists you work with, whatever it might be, and also managing the organisation in terms of keeping on top of budgets and keeping on top of all the sort of day-to-day running of an organisation. And at Extant, the artistic director has been Maria Ashodi since Extant was founded back in 1997. But Extant is currently going through this project that we're calling Evolve, which is about working out what Extant looks like after Maria steps away. Maria has made the decision that she is going to step down and leave the organisation, step away from the organisation in a couple of years' time. And so Extant is currently doing the big conversation, a big think about what happens next. And as part of that, there's going to be 2 trainee artistic directors, which is for a visually impaired person working in the British theatre industry to develop as a potential artistic director of the future, whether that's at Extant or at another organisation. So my job is all about, well, firstly, being part of the organisation on a day-to-day basis and getting my hands dirty and getting stuck in and doing some of the jobs that need doing, but also about me developing as an artistic director of the future and learning what it would take for me to do that kind of job and run an organisation and be the boss at some point in the future.
Right. Okay. So it sounds like there's a lot of sort of big changes going on within the company at the minute.
Yeah, it's a really interesting time. It's an exciting time. It's also slightly, there's a lot to do. It's a bit of a nerve-wracking time, but it's really, really exciting. I think it's quite rare that a company gets this time. They've managed to get the funding together so that we can spend this next couple of years doing that thinking and developing people and working out what's going to be next, because a lot of the time that just has to happen overnight. Someone leaves, someone else comes in, you don't get that buffer, that time to do the thinking about how things change. Actually, it's really exciting to have the opportunity to work out what's working well at the moment, what do we need to do better, what could we change about the organisation to make it run more smoothly and run more efficiently and be more ambitious and all that sort of stuff. So it's actually really exciting to have a bit of time to work that out. But yes, it's also quite nerve-wracking. Like in a couple of years' time, when Maria steps away, Extant is going to look very different, because for a long time, Extant has been Maria, and it's been Maria's vision and Maria's dream, and Maria has poured her heart and soul into keeping that company alive and keeping it running and keeping it doing the amazing work that it does. And so it's going to be, but that's also really exciting. It means there's some fresh ideas can come in and some new energy and all that sort of stuff. So it's full of amazing opportunities and exciting times.
Yeah, definitely. I can imagine. So when did you become interested in the arts, and what sparked your interest?
I mean, it's a big question, because I can't remember a time when I didn't love theatre. I think I was 6 years old when I said to my parents, I'd love to go to an after-school drama club or something like that. And I started going to one and kept going to that same drama club till I moved away when I was 18 years old. And then when it came time for me deciding what I wanted to study, when I wanted to go off to university or whatever it might be, I was a bit of at school. I was all right at school. I was a bit of a jack of all trades. I didn't really have, I was quite good at everything without being brilliant at anything. So I didn't really know what I wanted to do when it was time to leave school. So I thought I should just try and do the thing that I really, really love and do the thing that brings me the most joy, which is theatre and performance and drama and all that sort of stuff. And so I went off firstly I did a drama degree at a university, and then I did a master's degree at one of the big fancy drama schools where you're trained to be an actor. And so, and then I started my career from there and went on, and thankfully it's sort of all I've done since. I've managed to maintain a career as an actor and director and lots of other jobs, and where I wear lots of different other hats as well to work within the theatre world. So it's just it was the thing that I always loved, and it was quite nerve-wracking when I got to the age where you got to start thinking about what you're going to do with your life. But I thought, hey, to hell with it. I'm just going to give it a go. I'm going to try and give a go to doing the thing that brings me the most joy and that I love doing the most. And I don't regret that decision for a second. It was absolutely the correct one. I get to work every day within the sort of the industry and the world that I love. It's hard at times. It's a really difficult industry. It's an underfunded industry. There's no money, and it's a real battle to make a living sometimes. But it's when you get to do the thing that you do best, it's a joy, and I wouldn't change it for the world.
Oh, that's brilliant. I mean, obviously, participating in theatre has been such a big part of your life. Do you sometimes find that it's a bit of an escape for you when things get difficult?
It can be. I suppose it's different now in that it's what I do for a job. So sometimes now it's the thing that I'm escaping from as well. But even though it's my job on a day-to-day basis and I'm working 9 to 5 in it, it's weirdly, it is still the thing I do for fun. I still, even if I'm not working, I'll still go to the theatre or go to the cinema or whatever it might be. That is still where I get the most joy from. So some people would think that sounds like a terrible idea, and you get away from your job by going to the place where you work. But I just love it so much that yeah, it is really what I love doing. So yeah, it can be a massive escape, but also sometimes it feels like it's the thing that I need to escape from sometimes as well. And sometimes I just don't want to go anywhere near a theatre on my days off because I have to spend every second of every day thinking about it.
Yeah, I can imagine it's like that work-life balance, isn't it?
Oh, massively. It's really difficult, the work-life balance thing, when you're working in an industry that you love. And then because I work day to day in this industry, and because it's quite a sociable industry, then a lot of my friends also are people who work in the theatre industry. And so sometimes it's really hard to escape, because when you're social life, and then all you end up doing is talking about the theatre world. And then, when you're freelance as well, you work for lots of different organizations, and you're constantly battling to try and find what the next project is and what the next job might be, that sometimes it's really hard to switch off and get that work-life balance right. But thankfully, I'd rather be doing this. I'd rather be fighting for a good work-life balance in a work that I love and that brings me such joy, and but rather than trying to find a good work-life balance in a job that I didn't enjoy and that didn't bring me so much happiness and I didn't love so much. And I'd hate to do a job that I don't love.
Oh yeah, absolutely. You said you were about like 6 when you wanted to start, like a sort of theatre club. Was it that you went to see a show that sparked that, or did you just decide you wanted to do it?
I honestly can't remember what inspired it. I know I was one of those irritating, bratty kids that put shows on at home for their parents and stuff. And I'd done a couple of school plays, maybe I'd done the school nativity or something when I was before that. But I honestly can't remember what it was. I think it was just out of the blue. I just one day thought, that'd be fun. I want to give that a try. And then I never looked back.
Fair enough. I love that you took that opportunity though. You're just like, oh, let's give it a go. And that's literally been your life ever since.
Yeah, I'm a bit of a stubborn person. Once I decide that I'm going to do something, I sort of commit to it with all my energy. And once I decided that I was going to go off to university and study in this world, I sort of thought, right, I've got to do it now. I'm committing to it, so I'm going to give it everything. I'm not going to give up.
Yeah, I'm a bit like that too. Like once I'm doing something, I'm doing it and I'm not stopping. I'm a perfectionist as well. So it's like not stopping until it's perfect.
It's the best way to be. The best way to be.
Yeah, definitely. So what has been your favourite part of working for Extant?
Well, for me, it's getting to work with other visually impaired theatre people. That's one of the big draws of working for Extant with me. I love spending time with other visually impaired people, and particularly it's great having that network of people who are visually impaired, but also do the same job that I do and work within the same world that I do. And that's such a useful resource to have. And I've got to meet. I already knew quite a few other blind theatre makers and actors and performers and that sort of stuff, but I've got to meet even more working for Extant and getting to spend time working with them and building relationships with them and building professional relationships with, and widening that network is so exciting, because it's such a useful resource to have of other people who get it and other people who are going through the same things that you're going through, and going through the same ups and downs. It's like a vital part of that thing you've got to have, I think. And so that's been so good to enrich in that network and work with more visually impaired people and get to direct some visually impaired actors and work with some visually impaired writers and creatives and all that sort of stuff. That's definitely the biggest joy for me of working for Extant, is that community that Extant has, and that big wide network of people who support each other and have each other's back.
Oh yeah, 100%. I think it's so important to be around people who understand the things you're going through, because it just makes you feel so much less alone and so much more understood.
Yeah, definitely. And that is true from a VI perspective, and it's also true from just an arts perspective. Like, you go through so many ups and downs working in the theatre world, and obviously we go through so many ups and downs as disabled people, as blind people. And so, yeah, to have the people who get both of those elements as well is amazing. And really, like you said, makes you feel far less alone, and makes you feel far less like you're just banging your head against the wall on your own. And there's other people going through those same things too.
Yeah, absolutely. Because you do feel like that sometimes. Like, I know from being blind, there's sometimes where I'm like, oh my God, this is not fun. Why?
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, the fact that I've got friends now who I can just drop voice notes to on WhatsApp and be like, oh, this has just happened, I need to rant, I need to vent, and they can do the same back, is amazing, because we just get it. Yeah,
that's always good. So what are some of the challenges that visually impaired performers face?
I think that the big one is prejudice, it's discrimination, it's the fact that we don't get as much work as other people. The fact that unless a role specifically states that it's for a blind person, for a visually impaired person, then we probably won't get an audition. And if it does say that, they'll probably just cast a sighted person anyway. So there is still a lot of discrimination. It still feels like we're fighting against prejudice and the people in charge and their sort of the structures that are in place. There's still a lot of that. That is the big one for me, because getting in that room is a lot harder for me than it is for non-disabled performers and artists. So I still think that's the biggest one. And then there's a whole host of things, right? There's then when you're in that, like I always say, like when it comes to accessibility in like a workplace, and there's sort of two categories in which things need to change. And one, it's like practical, tangible things. It might be in the rehearsal room that, set's going to be in tape. Do it with like carpet tiles so I can feel it underfoot and whatever. I'm making sure that I've got my scripts in a way that is accessible to me, that works with my screen reader, so that I can, so that I can learn my lines that way, rather than just being turned up on day one and being given a paper script in small print. And there are practical, tangible things that need to change. But then there's also like environmental and attitudinal things that need to change. And I always say that I can forgive that first one not being right if the second one's right. If the culture and the attitude of a workplace is right, and they're willing to do the work to make it accessible, and everyone is welcoming and friendly and treats you like the valued equal and valued professional and valued colleague that you are, then if that's right, then I can forgive that I have to ask for something that hasn't been put in place from a practical point of view. But if the culture isn't right and the attitude isn't right, I find it really hard to forgive that, and I find it really hard to work in that environment. And so when I sort of consult people, I get paid every now and again to go and consult people about making their theatre workplaces more accessible, or for artists, for disabled artists coming in. I always sort of make that point, is actually make sure that everyone in that room has the right attitude, that the culture in that room is welcoming, is inclusive, and then everything else will fall into place from there. And that's not to say there isn't other work you need to do. There is practical, tangible changes that need to happen to make that room accessible, but they will happen if the culture is right, if the attitude of everyone in that room is right.
Oh yeah, I totally agree with you. And I think sometimes it's just about educating people who have never worked with someone with a disability before and are therefore kind of just ignorant. It's not always their own fault, but people just need to learn.
Exactly, yeah. And that's why I think actually one of the reasons I'm so passionate about theatre and the arts is that representation is really, really important. And one of the ways we can educate people is just by having more disabled people telling their stories on stages, on screens, on radios, on podcasts, whatever it might be. That's why I think this podcast is so exciting, is that, is getting disabled people just out there more and telling their stories and chatting about how it really is. And that can be a huge part in educating people, because for so many people that is their main understanding of what disability is. If they're not disabled themselves, if they don't have immediate friends and family who are disabled, then actually the way they get educated about disability is by watching the telly, is by seeing Rose Ayling-Ellis on EastEnders or whatever it might be, or seeing disabled characters on telly, or seeing disabled characters on when they go to the theatre or whatever, or listening to podcasts like this one. And so that's why I'm really, really passionate about representation and telling more disabled stories and getting more people out there on a big platform to show the world how great we are and all the things we can achieve, and then also like educating people about how we work and all that sort of stuff, and to try and tackle some of that ignorance.
Yeah, 100%. And obviously you mentioned earlier about, disabled performers not getting as much work as non-disabled performers. And obviously then you mentioned about sometimes, say, people with sight are cast as people are cast to play people without sight. And that is something that really annoys me, because if you were to cast someone who has that disability, they would be able to portray the most accurate representation of what dealing with that disability is like. And it's like that thing of, you would cast a non-disabled actor to play a disabled character, but would you do it the other way around? Most people probably wouldn't.
Exactly. It annoys me so much, and for a few different reasons. One, that reason you just said, of a disabled person is always going to portray a disabled character more realistically, more accurately, more just better. It's going to be a better performance and a more accurate performance and a more real performance. But also then, like I get it all the time, in that unless a character specifically says it's blind, then 9 times out of 10 I don't get an audition. It's not always true. I've managed to be in some shows where my character isn't defined by their disability. I just happen to be cast as the best person for the job, regardless of of disability. But 9 times out of 10 I'm not going to get an audition for a character unless it says this person specifically says it's blind. And so if that's the case, then I'm afraid if we're only allowed to audition for these particular roles, then you have to give it to someone from that group, because it's just unfair. It's double standards. And until we get to a point where disabled people are just seen for every role, regardless of whether the role is disabled or not, then we can have the conversation again. But even then, I would say I would still fight for disabled characters to be played by disabled actors, for the reason you said about, like, it's just going to be more, genuine representation. But also, I think there's an element of cultural appropriation about it, in that disabled stories throughout history have generally been told by non-disabled people. Our stories have been defined by non-disabled people, whether it's Richard III or Tiny Tim or whatever it might be, or Daredevil or whoever it might be. This is non-disabled people defining how people tell stories about disability, about disabled people, and defining then how we're seen and how we're treated by the rest of society. And that is wrong. And I feel like the only way we're going to be able to fight and do, like what we were saying earlier about good representation of disabled characters, and redefining toxic narratives around disability, the only way we're able to do that is if you put that power into the hands of disabled people. The only way blind people are going to be treated better in society is if blind people get to tell blind stories and challenge those narratives and re-educate people about what we're capable of and how our lives work and all those sorts of things. So yeah, I think there's so many reasons. The term that we use when a non-disabled actor plays a disabled character is cripping up. And so cripping up is the idea that a non-disabled actor is cripping up to play a disabled role, and like taking that license away from us and taking the ability away from us to tell our stories and stopping disabled people from getting the work that they deserve as well.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, you mentioned earlier about accessibility as well, and just out of curiosity, because obviously you mentioned about having your scripts be accessible, but how do you learn your scripts? Because obviously I know everyone might learn them slightly differently.
Yeah, definitely. I worked on a show a couple of years ago now, 18 months ago now, and there was 4 visually impaired people in that cast. And it was funny, all 4 of us did something completely different with our script. All 4 of us had a completely different way of learning our lines and reading our scripts. The way I do it is I use my screen reader. So I'll always have I've got an iPad that I use in rehearsals, and I'll have an earphone in, and I'll have reformatted the script into a way that works best with my screen reader so I can flick through and it feeds it to me in chunks. And I've gotten really good at that. It was quite difficult at first, and I was quite slow when I first started using that system. But years of practice means that I'm now quite quick at reading like that. But then the other thing is that I in rehearsals, other like sighted actors will have their script in hand, and still be reading their lines off the script way into rehearsals. I am always the first actor off book. Like almost always, I'm the first actor to have learned all my lines. Just because then that just frees me up. I'm never going to be as free to jump about the space and run around the space as freely as I want to be if I've still got my script in hand, because it's just slightly harder for me on that front than it is for the people. So I'm almost always the first actor to have learned my lines, with a couple of exceptions. Sometimes someone else gets there before me, but almost always it's me. I'm the first one off book. Other visually impaired actors that I know, blind actors that I know, will have someone else feeding their lines to them. So they might have someone next to them, or have an earpiece in, and just whilst they're rehearsing until they've learned their lines, there'll be someone whispering in their ear what their next line is, so they can repeat it. Yeah, there's other people that use Braille scripts. There's other people that use large print scripts, depending on what their vision is. I know one actor who formats his scripts where his lines are in big, bold, large print, so you can read them really easily. But then everyone else's lines are in small print, so you can just skip through those quickly and find his lines really quickly. So yeah, there's loads of different ways of doing it. It's about finding the way that works for you. I'm really like, sometimes I get a bit preachy to other visually impaired actors. I'm like, no, you can do it with your screen reader. You don't need someone else reading your lines, or you don't need large print, whatever it might be. But then I just realized, actually, no, I'm really passionate about that way, because that's the way that works for me. And that's the way that I've practiced over the years and got good at. Whereas other people have their other ways. So it's just about everyone finding their way and finding the way that works for them.
Yeah, definitely. I could imagine it's just about trying loads of different things and going, well, that worked or that didn't, and just finding the way that you think is right.
Exactly. It's exactly that. Trial and error until you find the way that works for you. And that is true of non-disabled actors as well. Like, everyone has a different process in that rehearsal room. Everyone will learn their lines at a different part of the process, or will get up on their feet at a different part of the process, whatever it might be, or will start making character choices at a different time, whatever it might be. Every actor has a different process, and when you're visually impaired, there's just some other choices to make as well around your process and how you work.
Yeah, absolutely. So, what do you think could be done to make theatres more accessible for visually impaired audiences?
Yeah, great question. This is another huge part of the work that I do. I do a lot of consultancy on this front. I work on a lot of shows where I'm sort of leading on making that show accessible to blind and visually impaired audiences. At the moment, I'm working on Midsummer Night's Dream at the Royal Shakespeare Company at the RSC. I also then go into rehearsals on Macbeth at Leeds Playhouse Theatre. I've just done Three Billy Goats Gruff at Derby Theatre as well. And there are three shows where we've approached it completely differently in terms of how we're going to make those shows accessible to blind audiences. But every single performance of those shows are going to be accessible, which is really, really rare. And for me, traditional audio description, the way audio description works, at least here in England at the moment, is that on one or two shows during the run of a show, there'll be an audio described performance, and that will be done in a very traditional manner. And the traditional audio description, it's great, it does a good job, but it could be so much better. And it really frustrates me that directors and writers and actors don't want to get more stuck into more creative ways of doing audio description and more creative ways of making shows accessible to blind audiences. And so that's a lot of the work that I do. And there's a whole host of different shows I've worked on where we've integrated audio description into the text so that there's no need for headsets and extra audio description, or we've kept those headsets and we've just made what's happening in those headsets more entertaining and more engaging and more relevant to the show, and performed in a way that's more suitable and appropriate for the show. So there's a whole host of different ways that you can do audio description more creatively and more artistically satisfying. But most theatres, most theatre makers, most directors just ignore those, and just if they do anything at all, they'll do the traditional way, and that's really frustrating to me. But I've had the joy of working with some amazing organisations, with some amazing artists, big and small, from the Royal Shakespeare Company to independent one-person shows, doing shows above pubs and everything in between, to make their shows accessible in a creative, interesting, exciting way. It feels like we're going in a good direction. There are more organisations and more artists trying to do more interesting things and trying to be more ambitious with audio description and access for blind audiences. But there's always more to do, and it's still a slow process. And hopefully, that progress is going to keep moving in the right direction.
Yes, hopefully. So, what do you think are some of the benefits of including visually impaired performers in your productions?
Oh, I mean, there's so many. One, the obvious one is just there's some really great visually impaired actors, some really, really brilliant visually impaired actors who don't get the work they deserve, and they're brilliant actors who are just going to give amazing performances in your show. And you shouldn't be cutting off and excluding a huge potential workforce and a huge talented pool of actors. And there's sort of I always put it into three sort of categories. There's sort of the arguments for diversity and inclusion. The first one being that morally it is wrong to exclude people because of their disability, because of their impairment. It's just a morally wrong thing to do. The second one being that it's creatively more interesting to have a more diverse range of people telling a diverse range of stories. I don't want to see the same group of people telling the same stories over and over again. That's not interesting. That's not exciting. So I always want the most exciting rehearsal rooms I've been in have been ones where it's a whole range of people with lots of different experience, all bringing their ideas and all bringing their experience of the world to that show. And that just adds a richness and an excitement to that show that wouldn't be there without that. And then also, as an audience member, the most exciting theatres that I go to as an audience member are ones that have a whole range of people and a whole range of shows told by a whole range of people. So it's just more creatively interesting to have diversity. And then the final one that people forget is that it also makes business sense to embrace diversity. Firstly, like I said, 20% of the population is disabled. So if you're not hiring disabled people, you're cutting off 20% of your potential workforce. You're cutting off 20% of the population and an incredibly talented pool of people who can bring so much to your show as an actor, as a director, as a writer, whatever it might be, or just your workforce, whatever your workforce is. You're making a terrible decision to just cut yourself off from that really talented pool of people. And then also, from a ticket sales point of view, 20% of the population, that's 20% of your potential ticket sales. If you're not making your show accessible and you're not having your show representative of society, you're missing out on so many ticket sales and millions of pounds worth of ticket sales that you're missing out. And that's true from a representation point of view as well. As a disabled person, I always go and seek out the work that has disabled actors, that has visually impaired actors, and so you're missing out on so much. So your show, if you work with a more diverse range of people, your show will be better, your ticket sales will be better, you will be acting in a more moral way. Like there is just, it's just a win-win situation. For me, there's no reason not to. There's no downside.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's just about including everyone as well, like making sure that everyone has an equal opportunity to participate in things and do what they love. And like you said, there are so many advantages to it.
Exactly. And everyone deserves their chance to show what they can do and do the thing they do best.
Yes, definitely. So, Extant is led by visually impaired people in both an artistic and managerial capacity, which I think is great. What do you think the benefits are of having people living with sight loss running an organization?
Yeah, well, so specifically with Extant's goals are around more inclusion for visually impaired people and showcasing VI talent and all that sort of stuff, and trying to fight for change within the industry when it comes to visually impaired people. And so, who has more knowledge of that than vision impaired people themselves? Who else can do that better than, we vision impaired people can advocate for themselves brilliantly, better than anyone else can advocate for us on our behalf. So, particularly in the terms of Extant, it couldn't be run by anyone else other than visually impaired people in terms of its aims, its goals, its structure. It couldn't be run by anyone else, really. In the industry more broadly, I think all the change we want to see, and this is in terms of VI people, it's in terms of disability more broadly, it's also in terms of other battles for inclusion and equality. The fact of the matter is the industry is a very diverse place in terms of its workforce on the ground. But when you get to the very top levels, when you get to the artistic directors, the chief executives, the boards, the senior management teams who are running organizations, it's a much less diverse place. And that needs to change, and that's why things change slowly. Is that the real leaps forwards when it comes to the progress and change that we want to see will come when there's a more diverse range of people in positions of power and leadership and influence in the industry. I worked at a big theatre, at Sheffield Theatres, the Crucible in Sheffield, for 5 years, and I loved that job. I loved working there. My job title was Agent for Change, and my job was to fight for better disabled representation and try and make that progress. And I loved it, and I was really proud of the progress that we made during the time that I worked there. But it also taught me that the real change and the real permanent, lasting change is going to happen when there's more disabled people in positions of power and positions of leadership. Accessibility and inclusion and all those things, they are not going to. Sometimes they fall off organizations' radar. Sometimes they slip down the agenda. They never slip down the agenda when there's disabled people there making the decisions, because we don't forget about accessibility and diversity and disability, because it is our lives. It's part of our everyday life. And so for us, it's never going to slip down our agenda. And we have the lived experience and the knowledge about what needs to change. And so we're going to make so much progress when we get to a time when there's a more diverse range of people at the very top of the industry.
Oh, yeah, totally. So what has been your proudest moment in your career?
Oh, that's a tough question. There's been so many. And the big one for me is always just the fact that I'm still here and I'm still doing it and I'm making a living as an actor and as a director and as a theatre administrator. And that is massive. That was my dream when I set off to go to university. And so the fact that I'm still doing that in my 30s is amazing. That specifically, there's 2 shows that spring to mind, and then there's 3 shows that spring to mind that I'm sort of really, really proud of in my career. 2 of them, there were these 2 big shows, Much Ado About Nothing and Oliver Twist, that were Ramps on the Moon shows. And Ramps on the Moon was this organisation that fights for disabled people's place within mainstream theatre. And both of those shows were big mainstream shows at big mainstream venues with a majority disabled cast and with integrated creative access. And I got to be in 2 of those shows, and I got to play brilliant roles and work with other brilliant disabled artists. And that both of those shows just filled my heart with joy. Getting to be part of a team of other disabled artists, doing our thing and getting 5-star reviews and really bringing the house down every night and really showing the world on big mainstream stages with big mainstream shows. And specifically on Much Ado About Nothing as well. Then I had an amazing day last year where I got a commendation at this thing called the Ian Charleson Awards, which is this award ceremony that the National Theatre and the Sunday Times do for young emerging actors in classical plays. And they do it every year. They've done it every year for 30 years, and it's supposed to be the next generation of big name actors get commendated at those. They try and spot that, and previous people who've been nominated have been Benedict Cumberbatch and Tom Hiddleston and Cush Jumbo and Dominic West, and people who are now like genuine international superstars. And so last year, the fact that I was one of those people nominated was incredible. And so that was definitely a proudest moment. And Ian McKellen being there to present me the award and stuff like that was overwhelmingly awesome. And then another show that was a much smaller show that I worked on a few years ago, which was called Henry V, and it was a retelling of Shakespeare's Henry V to make it about football fans and make it about being a football fan. And the reason that show means the most to me, it means a lot to me, and was proud of me, is because not only was I in that show as the main character, but I also wrote it and co-directed it and produced it. It was a completely independent production that me and another mate, we had the idea in the pub over a beer one day, and we just did it completely from scratch and made it ourselves. We found the money, we found the venues that would host it, and we did it, and we were just so proud of that show. It was just a classic thing of like it started as an idea in a pub over a pint, and then a couple of years later, it was touring around the country and getting great reviews in it. And it really felt like living the dream, that show. It was a much smaller show than those other ones that I mentioned, much smaller venues. So in some ways, some people would think it would be far less significant than those other big shows. But for me, it meant the world because it was mine. It was our baby, and we really it was completely a labor of love is the phrase. That it might not have made a huge national headlines like some of those other shows did, but the fact that it was mine made it feel really, really special.
Oh yeah, totally. Oh my, like you've accomplished so much, and all of those things sound amazing. Again, just out of curiosity, what would you say is your favorite show that you've been to see as an audience member?
Oh, that's a massively difficult question. I'll have to give a few. Because again, it's a range. I grew up in Greater Manchester, so I credit the shows that I went to see at the Royal Exchange in that era as the ones that showed me really what theatre could do and got me excited about theatre as an art form and a medium. And one of those shows was a play by a playwright called Simon Stevens, who wrote a play called Port, and it's about Stockport, which is where I grew up. And I could relate to it so much on so many different levels. So that had a huge, profound effect on me. A few years after that, what I think one of the best shows I've ever seen was there's a show at the Royal Shakespeare Company at the RSC called Oppenheimer, which is telling the same story as the film Oppenheimer that came out last year, but it has nothing to do with that film. It was a play that just had the same name and told the same story. And one of the reasons I couldn't bring myself to love that film that came out last year, however great it was, was because I was still in love with this play that had told the same story about 10 years previously or 5 or 6 years previously. And I loved that play. It was by a playwright called Tom Morton Smith. And that Oppenheimer was a brilliant play that I loved with all my heart. And then more recently, I'd give a shout out to Standing at the Sky's Edge, which is just opened on the West End. That was made at Sheffield Theatres whilst I was working at Sheffield Theatre. So I watched that show. Didn't work on it. I was just working in the building, same building as it was being made in. And so I watched it grow from an idea to being the smash hit show, and then coming back and transferring to the National Theatre and then transferring to the West End and winning all the Olivier Awards last year. So I watched that show as a fan, being there on the first night of the first version of it when it was just a small little new show at Sheffield to now being one of the biggest shows in the world. So that was awesome. And then I'm going to give a shout out, and you have to apologise if this show has a swear word in the title. So I'll have to apologise now for my bad language. But some visually impaired friends of mine last year made a show called It's a Motherfucking Pleasure, which is about visually impaired politics and blind politics and disability politics. And I love that show, and I'm so proud of them for the success they're having. It was one of the big hit shows at the Edinburgh Fringe last year. It's currently in New York. It's about to go on a UK tour. They've really, again, it was a bit like my Henry V show. That was their baby that they grew from scratch and did it all themselves. And it's now absolutely, they smashed it out of the park, and they're having huge success with it, and I'm really, really proud of them. And it's so exciting having visually impaired actors, visually impaired artists making a brilliant show like that. And it's got loads to say about disability politics and blind politics, and it's the fact that it's having huge success as well. That show meant the world to me.
Oh yeah, that's amazing. They should be so proud of that. So what would you say are Extant's hopes for the future?
I mean, keep on keeping on is the big one. Extant does so much hard work in supporting visually impaired artists of all stages of their career, from people just starting out to people who've been like me, who've been doing it for years. Extant is like the best ally for visually impaired artists in the theatre industry, and so it's essential that Extant continues doing that and showing a commitment to that. In particular, I think the job that I'm doing, training artistic director, is something that Extant have found quite exciting. I want to show a commitment to long-term developing the visually impaired leaders in the industry and developing blind people who can be in positions of influence and power right across the industry. I think that is going to continue being a priority for Extant for many years to come. And it's just got to be doing what Extant has always done, which is making work, creating a platform for blind people to be brilliant, to make great shows. We've just devised video drama at the moment called Unseen, which is going to go out into the world in March 2024. And I've directed that, and it's in response to a thing called the Unseen Report, which the Vision Foundation and Safe Lives did in 2022, which is all about how visually impaired people are more at risk of domestic violence than other people, and how a lot of the support services around domestic violence are inaccessible. And so that report found a number of foundings, and we wanted to start campaigning for some change in that department. And so Extant got some money and got commissioned to make an audio drama dramatising some of the findings of that report and telling some of those stories. So we recorded that last week as we're speaking. It's being edited as we speak, and it'll be out in the world soon. So that's a big, exciting project that we're really excited to get out to the world and get people to listen to. It was written we devised it with a team of 5 visually impaired women. And then it's been performed by an entirely visually impaired cast, directed by me as a visually impaired person, and so it's an entirely visually impaired team behind it, with a great visually impaired sound designer editing it together as well. And so I'm really excited by that project. I think it's going to be a really special one, and that gets released very, very soon.
Oh, yeah, that sounds brilliant. Well, thank you so much for coming on the podcast. It's been so lovely to talk to you.
Oh, it's been an absolute pleasure. Lovely to meet you, and thanks for inviting me on.
Oh, no problem. It's been so nice to meet you too. And thank you to my audience for listening, and I will see you all next time.